Hey, leaders and go-getters. If you're here, you're all about growth, pushing boundaries, stepping up, and making an impact. But when it comes to your career, are you leading the game or just playing along? Whether you're chasing a promotion, switching careers, or just want to stand out, it all starts with one thing: your executive summary. And guess what? We've got the Ultimate Executive Summary e-playbook, and it's 100% free. This step-by-step guide will take you from a blank page to a bold, standout executive summary that grabs attention and gets results. It's time to stop blending in and start owning your career story. Download your free copy now at leadthegame.org/free resources. And while you're there, check out 3 more powerful tools to help you take control of your career. Don't let your resume ride the bench. Get in the game. Head to leadthegame.org/free resources and grab your free e-playbook today. Now back to the show.
Welcome to a special edition of What's on Your Bookshelf with your host, Denise Russo.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. This is our life and leadership podcast where we're living out loud the pages of the books that are on our bookshelves. I am so excited for this special edition series and to introduce you to my newest guest and special co-host of a 7-part series that's called The Emotionally Agile Brain. And with me today is Dr. J.D. Pincus. He's the author of the book. He's going to tell us so much more about what's behind the book and what's coming in front of us in the future for business, for leadership, for coaches, for human potential. I'm just so encouraged and excited about this series. So this is a book about mastering the 12 emotional needs that drive us. But before we even get there, I need to share a little bit about Dr. Pincus, or JD as we'll call him throughout our show. So interestingly, JD is not just a really super smart psychologist, but he also started his career in a punk band, which I found extremely fascinating when he shared that with me. And he'll tell us perhaps a story about working with an artist that got kicked out of a venue, never to come back again. And if you've ever heard any of our shows in the past, then you know my fascination with the music business and some of the interesting stories that I have with some characters on stage as well. But after JD left his punk band, he started to study psychology in college and met some amazing mentors and great colleagues that helped him to look at emotions as opposed to just thoughts, which is what you would think about, I suppose, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, on psychology. Because he was rebellious from his punk band days, he decided to take the typical psychology route and turn it upside down, and was really struggling philosophically with what psychology was teaching at that time, and found a tribe of contrarians, he called them. And these are the people that really helped him in this circle to create a new way of thinking about the way we feel. So he decided to create not only a new platform, but a way for us to aggregate lots of information. So whether you're looking for results on your team, you're looking at ways to understand your own thinking, maybe understand the thinking of those that you love or those that you work around, or maybe you're just like me and you're really super nerdy and like all the technical stuff that goes behind what makes our brain tick, then this is going to be a series for you. JD, thank you so much for being here with me over the next weeks that we'll be together. I'm thoroughly excited and honored that you would be with me for this series.
Absolutely. So happy to be here, Denise, and for you inviting me. This is really a pleasure.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about how we're going to set up the next several sessions on this. And then what I'd love to do is just really have an intro about what this is all about and why people will want to follow us over the next several weeks. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay. So this book, friends, is not necessarily an easy read. It's kind of thick. It's written by a PhD, okay? And there's lots of content. There is a giant bibliography at the end. So if you like to do deep dives like we do on What's on Your Bookshelf, there is plenty of content that will take you even deeper than what we have here with our show. In fact, I was just looking, JD, and your bibliography starts on page 340 and it goes all the way to page 361. So there is tons of extra content for people to read.
That's right. Exactly. No, we did not skimp on the references and bibliography, but in a sense, I felt like that was really important. I'm covering a lot of territory. I'm basically covering the entire scope of human emotional needs and emotions and motivations. And so it touches on, what doesn't it touch, and I just didn't want to leave people, making assumptions about, where did this all come from? So it's very thoroughly documented.
Absolutely. Okay. So over the next couple of weeks together, we're going to be talking about things that motivate ourselves, things that motivate the material world, the social world, the spiritual world, and then working with motivations. And I'm going to be curious for you to share with us how you decided to separate the book that way. But maybe before we even go there, will you share with us and our listeners what motivated you to take motivations to write a book like this?
Sure. So I had a kind of long history of, sort of feeling that emotions were really important. And I guess that I can't separate it from the influence my parents had on me. In a sense, you could say I never had a choice about going into this field, in that my mother was a psychiatric social worker, clinical professor at Yale. My dad was a professor of neurology at Yale. He wrote the book behavioral neurology. He literally wrote the book on behavioral neurology. And what he was saying in that is that as a neurologist, he couldn't help notice that everything starts in the brain, and that he did a lot of really seminal work, basically showing that violent criminals, for instance, were people who had neurological deficits. And these deficits affected their frontal lobe's ability to moderate their behavior, so that they were basically just living on emotion, unchecked. I really couldn't ignore that from all of the talks we had, and the carpools where we would discuss his cases and all of that. And my mother had a very kind of a spiritual sense, which I've also sort of folded into this work. That was all sort of latent in me. It was subconscious, just always there. That this assumption that we are biological and spiritual creatures that evolved basically on our emotions and our ability to survive and navigate the world emotionally, and that really our ability to think and rationally cogitate is a fairly new invention, and it's kind of an add-on. It's not really what makes us who we are. It's not really what makes us human even. It's something that's sort of a recent addition to the mix, but our emotional selves really is our core. So I kind of had that coming into it. I kind of, would find myself arguing that position, even in high school, in biology classes and psychology classes. I ended up going through a kind of rebellious period, as Denise mentioned, where I was in a hardcore punk band. Not jokingly, it was called Controlled Aggression. So it was even emotional there. And we were famous, I guess, or remembered for opening for a guy named G.G. Allen and the Jabbers, who was a notorious punk act. In fact, he was so foul and extreme that they stopped the show midway during his second set and basically told him to never come back. So it was a great night for all of us, as teens. But as Denise said, then I went on to college and began to kind of find my way, and was then exposed to all of this sort of litany of extremely logical, rational thought about how it is that we make decisions and how it is that we navigate our way through the world. And none of it sounded right to me. It certainly didn't accord with my experience. I didn't, weigh the probabilities of something happening and then multiply that by the positivity or negativity of that occurrence. And that's basically what they were teaching. Fortunately, I found a group of people there, other contrarians. Skip Lowe, who ended up becoming the head of the Department of Psychology at UConn, Russ Buck, who was a major motivational theorist, who I just was lucky to encounter, and I sort of became part of his inner circle there. Actually, did my research in his lab in the communication science building, not in the psychology building, because he had the kind of equipment that I needed. He had the sort of psychophysiological stuff. He had hidden cameras. He had, all of the cool stuff that, I sort of naively thought psychology was all about. Back in the psych building, it was nothing but paper and pencil surveys. It was really quite uninteresting. So, under their influence, I kind of really started to understand motivation theory, emotions, and took it from there, into a whole range of different applications. I got my PhD. I ended up working in business for a long time. I ended up working in market research for a long time. I was a brand consultant. I've worked on like every major brand you can think of at one point or another, either as the client or as a competitor to the client. And did that for, 18 years or so. All the while, seeking to publish, seeking to kind of further my, sort of mastery of motivation theory and applying it in every way I could think to sort of real world problems. And then I was fortunate to encounter, leading indicator systems, who were sort of at a crossroads. They had the developers I needed. They had the resources I needed to kind of bring this whole concept to life. And we've kind of joined forces, and hence Agile Brain was born.
That's amazing. I didn't know that story, so thank you for sharing it. And it's fascinating. If you're not familiar with Agile Brain, I want to encourage you to go to agilebrain.com. There's lots of information there, but over our next several weeks, I'm sure that we'll be talking about that even more. Interestingly, in the foreword of the book, JD, there's some really interesting depth to what this book is about. 125 years of psychological theory, over 100 theories in all, but you've narrowed it down somehow into these 4 domains, 3 levels. I know we'll get into that over the next couple of weeks, but at the core of that, in the foreword, it says that this is simply about helping humans value emotions that drive positive change. Why is that important?
Well, I think the assumption that a lot of people have naively is that what we're thinking about right now is really what matters. And what they ignore is, what do they really need? What are they really after in their lives? Because the truth is, we don't think about it a lot. Freud knew this, and Jung knew this, that basically, if you have an emotional conflict in your life, like there's some basic emotional need that's not being satisfied, it's going to find ways to get met, either in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. And you can't really bury them. You can't really ignore them. They will find a way to come back because they're so powerful, and they really ultimately shape what we do. And if we don't acknowledge them, we can get ourselves into a whole lot of trouble because it's ultimately who's driving the bus. There's the metaphor that I know Jonathan Haidt likes of the sort of the rider on the elephant, and the elephant is our emotions, and the rider is our sort of, conscious, rational selves. And that, we may feel like we're in control, but ultimately the elephant's going to do what it wants. And we're there to basically sort of justify it and rationalize it. And so that's, I think, why this matters so much, that because we're rational creatures and verbal creatures and explain everything that we do in words, we tend to overinvest in thinking that that's actually who's in control. The truth is, it's not. It's our subconscious emotions that are really doing the work. They're making the decisions, and everything else we're just another Jonathan Haidt analogy, which I love. He called it the emotional dog and its rational tail, which kind of captures it. It's sort of, our rationality is along for the ride.
So is the subconscious, JD, this thing that's inside of you, or is that thing you and you just happen to be something outside of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes down to, defining what the self really is and whether we are actually a collection of multiple selves, I think the jury is out on that. To me, I believe that who we really are is defined by our emotional needs. Our emotional needs truly are our values. I think there's no difference between emotional needs and values. I think if you're a person who cares about other people, caring is a value of yours. That's an emotional need. You have an emotional need for nurturance, for caring, for being cared for by other people, for caring for other people. You can't really separate those concepts. Same thing, the need for inclusion. That's a value. Do you feel like other people should be welcomed, or do you feel like, you should form cliques? That's a basic thing that separates people, these kinds of things. And those are not just, emotional needs, they're values. And you can make the same argument for every one of the 12, that these are things that, what you need, what you feel you need deep inside. If there's some need that's not being met, that's going to drive your behavior. And that's why you really have to, kind of understand what that is, pay attention to it, bring it into consciousness so that you can then be, conversant with it and act on it appropriately.
Gotcha. So chapter 1 is called What Motivates You. And I'm curious, it starts out by talking them around that motivation concerns the ultimate reasons behind our intentions and our behavior. And I'm curious, as I was reading through it, do your intentions always lead to your behavior, or are your behaviors always tied to your intentions, or can those two be untethered?
Yeah, totally. They can. Intentions, the word sort of implies rationality, that there's sort of an awareness of what your intentions are. I think there's enough evidence that's accumulated to show that you can create, intentions and behavior completely outside of rationality. There's a great example that I put in the book of a neurologist named Yves Aguid, who is a French neurologist who Damasio talks about him. He had put these electrodes into someone's brain in a particular place and found that, with a click of a button or moving a dial, you could turn someone from just being completely, normal, happy, stable, into feeling so depressed that they were talking about suicide simply because of activation of a particular part of the brain. And so here it is. That's the question. Was that their intention? Was that because they had some mental illness? No, it's not. It was because direct stimulation of a part of their brain caused them to suddenly have a bunch of thoughts, caused them suddenly to have a bunch of intentions. That the emotions really are primary, and they drive a lot of what we believe are our intentions, but not all of them. And we sometimes do things that we don't intend to do because it's that powerful. The elephant, is kind of taking control and saying, we're going to do this, whether you want to do it or not. So
That's fascinating. Can your conscious brain, maybe we'll get into this later, but can your conscious brain train, I don't know, your neural pathways or your subconscious brain to change those thoughts?
Yes, definitely. I think that's why CBT is useful, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's really just practice. It's just practicing over and over again, making certain choices, feeling some sort of reward on making good choices. And that what you're doing essentially is building habits. You're kind of not letting your emotions just rule you, unchecked. You're funneling those needs and those emotional drives toward positive behavior, positive outcomes, and then finding good results from it, which should be reinforcing back to strengthen that. And really is, the brain is just a series of highways, and the ones that are well traveled are the ones that tend to get used. If you tend to, blow up at people and you tend to, be a tyrant and all the rest, if that works for you, unfortunately, that gets reinforced. If it doesn't work for you and you are finding that it's leading you to nothing but misery, it's going to probably get extinguished. So that whole reward pathway, and what becomes a habit and how strong it becomes is often defined by the sort of consequences of that behavior.
So if we can train our brain, we can change our thinking, we can change our belief systems, we can change our motivations, we can change our life.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We're not, I think that's the point I like to make, is that as subject as we are to our emotions, we do fortunately have ways of channeling them, integrating our needs with each other so that the fulfillment of one helps fulfill others, that we actually do have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of how we manage our emotions. And it's, to me, I find it much more useful to think of them in terms of a series of discrete needs that you have, that work together, or can sometimes fight each other, but that it's sort of this symphony of different, needs that are in play, as opposed to thinking of it as just emotion, period, like sort of positive emotion, negative emotion, emotional intelligence. These kinds of concepts don't really get into the specifics of what's going on emotionally, the content of what's going on emotionally. And I think that's a huge mistake. I think you got to take the time to really say, so what is this emotional need? Am I feeling lonely? Am I feeling insecure? Am I feeling I have to, conform or be inauthentic? Do I feel like I'm being held back? Do I feel like I'm being, I'm afraid of failing? Am I not able to become engaged in the flow? All of those are discrete emotional needs, and they all are well documented. It's just, I think you need to kind of consider all of them simultaneously to get the full picture.
Thank you. There's a lot of interest in people that are in L&D, coaching, HR, the people side of business right now with the science of the brain, the science of thinking, the science of driving behavioral change, the science of saying, if you have a certain result at work, it's not just about the action or inaction you took, but how you thought about it. And so you mentioned in the book around how the rise of the era of neuroscience really got turned into different ways of thinking through irrationals like Kahneman and winning the Nobel Award. We were talking about that a little bit off mic. I'm curious, when you think about where you think the future of the way that we think on these things, especially for those that may be listening that either lead teams or lead programs that help teams succeed in business. What is the best approach for people to take something like this body of work that you have and be able to look at it in a way that becomes a guidebook for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a natural resistance. It's sort of, part of it's cultural, it's part of our sort of, Aristotelian heritage of Western civilization. It's sort of what this country was founded on in some ways. This concept of rational, democratic, decision making, that we really prize rationality above everything else. And I totally get it. It has many wonderful benefits associated with it, but it does get in the way a little bit of recognizing the importance and the power of emotional needs. So I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with rationality. The more rational people can be, the better, probably. But I think what's ideal is to surface those emotional needs and then integrate that with rationality. So to bring it into consciousness, make conscious, deliberate decisions about what to do with it, how to fulfill it, recognize that need, sort of validate it, and then don't ignore it. So I think if someone's leading a team or they're in L&D, I would say that's the thing you've got to be careful about, is to not overly rationalize, and sort of make everything so logical that it sort of sounds very convincing. It would make a good, sort of legal argument, but does not actually reflect reality. People do things for all kinds of reasons, and they make terrible decisions all the time. We just saw that really, I find it kind of sad case from that Coldplay concert the other night, where the CEO has got his arms wrapped around the head of HR, and then they end up on camera, and then they immediately, if they had just played it cool, it would not have been a story, but they headed for the hills. But why did they do that? They know that's wrong. They know that's not a good example for their teams. They know she's the head of HR. I mean, oh my God, and the CEO. I mean, they know better, but they did not know better enough to actually change the behavior because the behavior was driven by emotion.
I like that you said the word fulfillment, that you also shared this story that has come out in the news. And it's interesting because maybe to the side of all of this also, you were talking about values, but there's also the side of ethics. And you talk about in this first chapter, and I know we're almost out of time for today, but we talk about personal fulfillment. Isn't the word fulfillment an interesting word? It's about full and fill of some sort of something for yourself. And you were even talking about how we look to things to give us fulfillment or refreshment. And you mentioned some really great brands out there that they use their advertising dollars to give you this fulfillment that you think you're seeking. And on What's on Your Bookshelf, we spent an entire year, JD, studying the science of happiness. And it was a really interesting series. We did 4 different books around that topic, but it was seemingly like for most of the authors that there's this elusiveness to it. Like you have to be on a journey towards something that you don't already have, as opposed to living inside of something that you do have. In fact, earlier, before we did that one, we did a episode about one of my favorite topics, Ikigai, which is a Japanese concept about finding the center of your purpose in life. And what the contrast is from a business side, there was an author that talked about how you have to be finding this thing you don't already have. But the Japanese say that that's not what the word means at all. It means that you have it inside of yourself. You just have to recognize it. And it almost seems like in your book and what you're talking about with the subconscious level is that these motivations and emotions, they've always been with you. But if you don't recognize them, how can you activate them? Or into your example of this really busy highway system, how do you make sure your car is on the right one?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is a kind of an interesting east-west divide on this, in that, the sort of ultimate good in Buddhism, for instance, is the state of non-striving, right? That you don't want anything. You're basically in a state of sort of gratitude and bliss for just simply, being present and in the moment and aware. And I actually agree with that. I think that's not inconsistent with what I'm saying, which is that the goal here, it's very hard for us, particularly Westerners, to imagine a state of non-striving. But if you think about it, that's really what my position is here, is that you have a series of unmet needs. They are going to sort of occupy you while they exist, while they remain unfulfilled. And this may be different than Buddhism in that I believe you should go and take active steps to fulfill those needs. Once those needs are fulfilled, I think the next step, and this is at the very end of the book, we're kind of jump ahead here, the next highest level is the sort of integration of needs, so that what I do, for fun is actually something meaningful. What I do, for work is something that actually is ethical. That there isn't a trade-off between those things. That you've actually integrated your needs so that what you do for one satisfies the others. When you're living that kind of life, to me, that's indistinguishable from nirvana, right? That's a state of non-striving, because you actually have, to a large extent, satisfied those needs. And then I think there's a whole other set of needs that can emerge, but we can save that for another day.
That sounds good. Well, we're almost out of time for today, so let's just set the stage that next episode, we're going to dive into part 1, which is about the things that motivate ourselves. Seems like maybe that's the base layer, the safety, authenticity, and potential. We'll jump into that a little bit. If you are listening and you want to learn more about what we're talking about, get the book. We'll make sure that Zach has a link to the book in the show notes. You can go to agilebrain.com and even be able to take an assessment for free for yourself. If you'd like a debrief of that assessment, you can reach out to me. Zach has information in the show notes as well as how you can reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk you through getting set up with a debrief on Agile Brain. But before we go for today, JD, what is anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with that you want to make sure we don't miss, since all we did so far was not even touch on anything beyond the first section of the book?
Yeah, I mean, one part of the intro that I like, that I think is worth kind of commenting on, is the fact that, and you touched on this a bit, that there's sort of a Madison Avenue commercial, offering to fulfill all your needs, that comes in various forms, in TV commercials and social media and online ads, that all promises to meet all your needs. And it's no accident that every brand out there basically positions themselves according to these needs. And we can talk about that more in depth some other time. But the point I like to emphasize is that is not authentic fulfillment. It's pretending to be fulfillment, and that's probably good enough to get some sales, but that's not actually going to meet your needs long term. So drinking a Coke, it is not the same thing as feeling included and feeling a sense of belonging and connectedness. That's how they position it. It's not actually going to deliver that. Having a Dr. Pepper is not going to make you your authentic self. It's not going to say that maybe it says to somebody else that you're different, but it actually doesn't satisfy that need at all. So that it's really important to kind of recognize that the marketing and advertising world gets very deeply what our needs are, and they market to them, but that's not authentic fulfillment. Authentic fulfillment comes from within and through recognizing what we really need and actually taking concrete steps in the real world to achieve those things.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Friends, if this has been of value to you, please share the episode with others. We're going to be together for the next several weeks. It is worth your while to get the book, to walk you through the deeper sense of what this book is about, because we're really not going to be able to go into depth in each and every chapter. We will actually have some opportunities for those of you that may want to do that as well. I would definitely encourage you to get to be a part of those special offerings that we'll have, to be able to learn more directly from Dr. J.D. Pincus. On behalf of my friend, Dr. J.D. Pincus, my name's Denise Russo. Thanks for joining us today on another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.